Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Module 3, The Art of Writing, Part 2. This is Lesson 1, first lesson in this module, and we'll be looking at the basic story structure for fiction writing and non-fiction writing. So let's get right into it. Now, the image on the slide you're looking at is called Freytag's pyramid. It was put together by a novelist in 1863. His name was Gustav Freytag, and he put together this, it's sort of like a framework, and it describes the 5 key stages of a story, whether it's a novel or a short story, or whatever it is, as long as it is a fictional story, it should follow this very simple framework from start to finish. So we'll be talking about each stage, or in the framework we'll be talking about everything it entails. We're talking about what should be or what should happen at each stage of the story. Now, the first stage is the premise. It is also known as the setup or the exposition. Okay, so it's basically the beginning, because your story, the story that you're writing, has to start somewhere. So the premise or the exposition or the setup is the beginning of the story. Now, the setup can be more than one chapter. It can be 1, 2, 3, even sometimes 5 chapters. Okay, it depends on what the writer feels is, or what the writer feels will work for their story. Okay, so the job of the writer's job during the premise is to introduce all the major elements that will be used in the story. You introduce your characters, some of the characters, but most especially you introduce your main character. You need to set the tone for your story here. You need to set the tone for your story during the premise. You need to start introducing the readers to the setting that you're going to use, or one of the settings that you're going to be using in the story. So basically, in summary, the premise is where the writer introduces the reader to how things are going to be run and who are the characters that are going to be running these things in your story. You could introduce your villain here. You could if you want to, but it's not it's not compulsory. But you have to let us know who your main character is during the setup. Okay, a story is basically about a before and after. So your premise is basically the time when everything is balanced in the world that you are creating. The world is normal, everything is good and right with the world that your main character is living in. During the exposition, you show us how everything is normal with their world, and by the end of it, it will be the after. Okay, what happened, and the after and everything in between. What happened to disrupt the world that your character is living in, and then how it changed them. So your premise is your before, how the world was normal. Okay, so your premise should end with the catalyst or the inciting incidents, or you can call it the unbalance, because we said the premise is the balance, and then the catalyst should be or it can also be known as the unbalance. It is that event that occurs that moves your character from the normal into the unknown. It's not listed as part of the stages. It's just something that should happen. It should end. It should be what you end your premise with. Okay, nobody wants to read how everything is normal. Something must happen to upset that normal world that your character, that your main character or hero is living in. So that should be the catalyst. You have to think of something that could really truly disrupt what the life of your main character. Okay, in the example I gave in the last module about Abdullah, I don't know if you remember, about Abdullah, being at home and then receiving a message. I'm going to just use that same example here now. So for the premise, it's that Abdullah is at home, just lazing around, not doing anything, browsing through the internet. And then the catalyst will be that thing that disrupts the um, the siesta, or the rest that he is having, and which was that email, the message that came into his phone about him receiving an invitation to come for an interview. Okay, now that is the catalyst. That is that incident that has happened that disrupted Abdullah's normal world. Okay, so you can also think about what you want to use as your own catalyst. Okay, or inciting incident. Again, using the words interchangeably so that you know that they mean the same thing. Okay, the inciting incident or the catalyst is what paves way for the conflict that we're going to be exploring or solving in the story. It is that big event that is going to set up the character for his quest. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next stage, which is the rising action. Now here is where a lot of events happen, a lot of action a lot of action happens here as well, a lot of transition happens, and many things happen that cause other things to happen, okay, to your main character. In oftentimes during the rising action, things get worse for the hero or the main character, because he tends to make decisions, and most times most of the authors out there, they make sure that everything he does makes the the conflict get worse. Okay, he can't seem to find a solution to the conflict, so everything gets progressively worse, and it seems like he can't find a way out of the situation, and he keeps trying so many other things. In novels, most novels, you see that the rising action, and just like you can see in the image on the screen, you see that the rising action is probably the longest part of the pyramid. It contains, it's usually written in so many pages. It's usually the bulk of the story. It's usually the bulk of the story. Okay, because it's the bulk of the story, because as the story is unfolding, we gain access to pieces of maybe backstory, receive reasons why some things are happening, or some things happened. We learn more about the character, we learn or the main character and other characters, we learn more about them. If you want to foreshadow some stuff that's going to happen in the climax or during the falling action, this is where you do that. If you want to introduce more characters, you can do that, and then here you can introduce your antagonist or the villain. Okay, you introduce the villain, the main adversary for your main character. Okay, and you can also complicate the plot here, complicate things a little for your main for your hero. Don't make it easy for him, because life is not easy really. So you can't just have a hero that just goes from point A to point B without having any hassles or without encountering any problems or obstacles on the way. So you can complicate the plot here as well. So for example, the rising action could be that, we just gave a very simple example in the last module, but we're going to complicate things a little bit more here. Okay, so when Abdullah receives the message on his phone for him to come to an interview by 12 o'clock, and it's already, I think it's already, let's say it's already 10 o'clock. He has just 2 hours to get from the mainland in Lagos. I'm setting it in Lagos now, from mainland to the island. So he has to get going fast. Okay, so he rushes out of the house, but then when he gets out, he finds out that he gets to the bus stop, takes a bus, but he finds out while he's in the bus, and it's left his immediate environment, obviously, but he finds out that he's forgotten to take his CV. So he comes down, and it's already 10:30 by this time, almost quarter, let's say it's quarter to 11. Okay, and Abdullah is already panicking. Okay, so he has to go back home and fetch his CV. That takes him about another 15 minutes, and then he comes back to take another bus to get to where he is going. But finally, because that's not the real, it's not the real, it's not the main conflict in the story. Okay, the main conflict is something else. Okay, so I'm just, you're just doing some of these things to, have people care for your character. I'm just giving an example. Okay, so you can also come up with other things that will help people, the readers, care for your character, or have this feeling of, urgency or something like that. Okay, so I'm just coming up with this idea from off of the top of my head. So just as long as you understand the concept that I'm trying to explain, I'm good. Okay, so finally Abdullah gets there 1 minute, 1 minute. He gets there at 11:59. Thank God he does that. Okay, so you could foreshadow something that the main thing that is going to happen. Okay, you could give people instances, or you could give people an idea that something was going on at Abdullah's place and he didn't know because he was in a rush. He didn't notice because he was in a rush. In the last example we gave, someone came into his house and picked cleared his house of everything that he owned. Okay, so you could just put a little tidbit for your reader here, that when Abdullah got home, he found out that the door was unlocked. Okay, his door was unlocked, but he didn't pay any mind to it. He didn't pay much mind to it. It was like he thought that he locked the door. Maybe you could just put something like Abdullah thought he had locked the door when he left. He was pretty sure he locked the door, but he found it open and he just couldn't dwell on it. So he went back inside and got his CV and rushed back outside. Okay, so that in the when your reader reads on and they see, when they find out what happened, they would remember and go back to that piece of information that was just seemingly there, not doing anything, but it really meant that someone had already broken into his house then and he didn't know. Okay, so I'm going to end this part of the stage now. So just know that in your rising action, you talk about backstories, everything. You complicate the plot, introduce more characters, introduce your villain, and all of that in here. Now, the next stage we'll be looking at is the climax. Here, the worst has happened to your main character. It's so bad that he believes that he cannot, come out of it. Okay, it's really bad. it's really bad. And here, some people think that maybe they should just write something that's very, very short, and it all is over quickly. But sometimes it's good to make the draw the climax out just a little bit, so that your reader can also feel the emotions that your main character is feeling at that moment, at their lowest point. Okay, because during the climax, the main character or the hero is at their lowest point, and the villain obviously feels that they have won. So for Abdullah's story, we see that he comes back home, feeling dejected, and because obviously the interview it wasn't real, it was a prank, and he was wondering who could have done something like that to him, coupled with the fact that the other things that happened before and after he got to the interview venue. And then he comes home and finds out that every speck or every piece of belonging that he owned has been, has been cleared. He comes home to an empty house. And to top it off, how to top that up, he starts getting alerts on his phone, and he sees that everything that he has in the bank has also been taken too. So you can imagine how Abdullah will be feeling at this moment. So that is the climax of our story, or the example that we are using here. So just make sure that it's something that will also reflect the theme of your story, because somehow the turning point, okay, of your character, of your main character, your hero. It's where he decides that he's going to do something about what has happened. Okay, so you make sure that you make it count. You make sure that you make it count. There's no strict formula to doing this. You just make sure that when you write it, you make sure that it's something that is going to matter. It may also be one scene, and it could be several chapters. It's up to um, the writer. Like I said, for every stage of this of the structure of the story, whatever the length, or whichever way you want to put it, is up to the character. Sorry, the writer of the piece. So the next stage, the fourth stage that we'll be looking at, is the falling action, and here is where the writer, you know, shows us, that is the readers, the aftermath of the climax. What happened after the climax? Do other conflicts arise as a result of the climax? How does the climax show us, or how does the climax show us the theme, the central theme of your story? We're going to be talking about theme later. So, and how does your main character and other characters in the story, how do they react to the events that happened during the climax? So for the falling action in our story, we could say that Abdullah receives a message from his friend. I forgot to mention, we would have introduced that friend. He's the villain here, so we would have introduced him during the second stage, which is the rising action. So we would have introduced him then. So during the falling action, we could say that Abdullah receives a text message after everything in his account has been cleared, and he's panicking. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know who to call, and his friend sent him a message out of the blues and tells him what he did and why he did it. And maybe Abdullah did something to him about 10 years ago, and he's taking his revenge or something like that. Okay, so Abdullah finds out who did this, and you know, he decides that he's going to, you know, fix this or do something to fix this, go somewhere, make decisions, okay, that would help him resolve what has happened to him. Okay, so you here you can also tie up the loose ends. You can, resolve um, everything that has been the conflict that the conflicts that have been happening so far. You resolve them here during the falling action, or at least you do make the your characters, your main character and the other characters, allow them to make decisions that will push um, the story to some kind of new normal. During the premise, we said that that is the premise is the normal for your character, and then the catalyst pushes, you know, the story away from that normal. So you make the falling action something that, turns the story towards some sort of new normal, okay, for your character. Okay, but you still have to keep the focus on the climax and everything that happened before. Is still, you have to tie everything together in a nice way. Do not shift the focus. Do not make something else that will happen just out of the blues. No, whatever happens should be something that was caused, okay, directly or indirectly, by the events leading to the climax. Okay, so that's basically what the falling action is supposed to do. That's the job of the writer while writing the falling action of their story. So um, the final stage of the structure, of the basic story structure, is the resolution. Now here, the falling action, every day the events during the falling action as well drive what is going to happen during the resolution. Okay, and it's just basically the new balance. Okay, we had an old balance and now we must have a new balance, or a new normal for your character. You can also call it, it can be like a solution to whatever problems have been happening throughout the book. Okay, and here the writer also has to keep whatever promises that you've been making during all the other stages. You need to keep this, and you need to keep those promises here, fulfill every foreshadow that you have made. You need to fulfill all of them here. If you've been setting up some sort of pattern from the beginning, you need to complete the pattern here during the resolution. And also, you have to conclude the story. You have to conclude the story. And it may be that, obviously it could be on a light note, and that means that the antagonist loses and the protagonist wins. You could do that any way that you like, or you could make it something more, dark or chilling, and you'd say that the antagonist won and the protagonist lost, or something like that. Okay, so you can choose whatever you want, but it has to be something that be logical. You don't just say because you want to have a shock factor or shock your readers, and then you just do something like out of the blues that does not make any kind of logical sense, or does not, or you will be leaving your readers cheated and be like, where did that come from? So you make sure that it's something that the resolution is something that um, makes sense. Okay, it makes a logical sense. It could be that the protagonist will learn from their mistakes and start a new life. Okay, or forgive the antagonist, maybe. Okay, that is something that would be interesting to see. The hero forgives the villain that has taken so much from them, or done so much bad things to them, and then they decide to forgive them. Okay, so just make sure that it's something that is logical and will make will not leave the reader cheated, okay, and that is in line with everything that you've been writing from the beginning. Okay, so for Abdullah's story, you could have taken some decisions during the falling action, and we could say that he decides to forgive his friend because that thing that he did 10 years ago that made the friend retaliate in such a manner was something really bad, and then he decides that, hey, it's now 1-1 and he doesn't want to seek retribution. Or he could feel, or we could say that Abdullah decides that, no, I'm not taking this from my friend. What did I do? The last the thing that he said I did was maybe I took his pen and broke it or something that is that was trivial, and then he decided to pay me back in this way. No, I'm not going to take that. And he takes actions that finally ends up with his friend paying back every penny that he took from him, and ending up in prison. Okay, so we could do either way, or we could say that nothing happened and his friend got away, but Abdullah believes that whenever he finds his friend, he's going to take back everything he has, but decides that he will never trust anybody again and just starts living a new life. Okay, so it could go anyway, whichever however you want to do it. Okay, just make sure it's something that will be satisfying for you as a writer and for your reader. Okay, so there you have it. This the 5 stages of a story structure, the framework that a writer should follow while writing their story, fictional writer in this case. And they are the premise or the exposition or the setup, and then you end that with your catalyst, the inciting incident, and that goes on to the rising action, where you set up, you introduce more characters, introduce your villain and all that, and then that will set up the climax, where everything comes to a head, and you show exactly what the result of everything that has been happening during the rising action. And in the falling action, you show whether more conflicts arose due to what happened during the climax and the decisions that your main character is going to make, that will then drive the resolution, where you conclude the story and tie up every loose end, and fulfill every promise that you have been making from the beginning of the story. Okay, so that's all for the basic story structure for fiction writing. Now we're going to be looking at for non-fiction writing. Now, for non-fiction, it's very simple and straightforward. You pick a topic that you want to talk about, that you want to teach about, that you want to make people learn from, and then you give an introduction. You introduce yourself, identify the purpose of the book, the reason why you're writing the book, or the reason why you've chosen the subject matter that you did, and then you also introduce the subject matter as well. And then next will be the body, which is going to be the bulk of the book. You give detailed information about the subject matter, and you give examples to support every information that you have given in during your detailed info that you gave. Okay, so you give examples to support, and this is the bulk of the book. It may span several chapters, okay, depending on what you're talking about or what you're writing about. And then we come to the conclusion, where you summarize everything that you've talked about in the body. You summarize everything, and then you write the conclusion, and that is what it is that you expect the reader to have learned, or what you expect the reader to take away from the information that they have absorbed in the body. Okay, so it's really very simple. I want to mention here that I think writers of memoirs, okay, they use some kind of hybrid of both the fictional story structure and the non-fiction story structure, because a memoir is basically a non-fiction book, but it follows some of the rules of fiction. Okay, so for example, if you're writing a memoir, you're going to need to introduce yourself, okay, set up a premise like in the fiction part, and then you give a catalyst, which is something that disrupted the normal world that you lived in then. Okay, so I'm not going to go into everything, but understand that it's a kind of mixture of both of these structures for a memoir writer. So so